With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now you're welcome along, Wednesday Night Rugby. So the two-legged Heineken Champions Cup round of 16 format, I think generally deemed a success. Lots of very close run affairs. One of the few duds in that respect was Leinster being too good for Connacht. Double scores in the end, 82 points to 41 on aggregate. Leinster away to Leicester in the quarterfinals. Munster, meanwhile, came good at home to Exeter. They will face Toulouse in the next round, who themselves beat Ulster in Belfast. So we have two provinces into the quarterfinals. Meanwhile, the TikTok Women's Six Nations returns this weekend. Notably at Welford Road, England against Ireland is Sunday at midday, and the EPCR have announced dates for the European quarterfinals. So Saturday, May the 7th is the day for the Irish provinces. Munster, Toulouse, 3 o'clock kickoff at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, May the 7th, and then 5:30 straight into it, Welford Road, Leicester against Leinster again on Saturday, May the 7th. Very happy to say Andy Dunne has popped into the studio. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Joe.
And Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times. You're there, Gerry. How you doing?
Not too bad, Joe. How you doing? How you doing, Andy?
Hi, Gerry.
So we might start with Thomond Park, Gerry. Munster 26, Exeter 10. They overturned a 5-point deficit, an 11-point win on aggregate. Simon Zebo doesn't need the ball often to do something special, turns out.
Well, it's just as well, isn't it? He's a bit of a luxury item in that left wing. He gets so little balls. It's been the story of his season. Keith Earls doesn't see much more, wherever else on the right wing either. And you compare and contrast that with Leinster's wingers and how often they get involved, whether it's Leinster getting the ball to the edge, where they do a lot more than Munster, or bring their wingers in off their wings to, for more work across the line, which obviously Leinster do a huge amount very effectively with James Lowe. But yeah, the ball reaches him and then he's running towards the touchline. It's on the far side of the pitch from the press box, Joe. Where's he going? He's just going to get hammered into touch here. He can't make it around the outside. But of course, he knew exactly what to do. And that being said, I would safely say that the vast majority of the 20,000 plus in the stadium didn't fully appreciate the wondrousness of that offload inside to Damien Deayende until it was shown again in slow motion from a couple of angles, and then you could hear the oohs and the ahs. It was an extraordinary moment of high skill.
Yes, I think I was second replay, Andy, before I fully appreciated it.
Yeah, possibly third in my case. I had the exact same sense of it as Gerry. I felt he's gone up Mugs Alley, as they used to call it. He's going to get three-man collared into touch, and just so always refreshing to see little moments of great skill. I think there's a real worry around his lack of possession, and similarly on the other side on Keith Earls. That translates. It's a deeper issue with Munster that's ongoing. Is you can't really clearly identify what is their style of play. It's a mix and match of many different styles. The away game in Exeter probably really showed that. With Healy playing at 10, who's a massive boot, they've completely underutilised it. They ran from deep, from everywhere, and they didn't execute that well in the away leg. It seemed quite out of character for them. So they've Zebo at home and they've Carbery playing at 10, and they don't use him when you'd expect those two players to utilise the ball much more. So they're a little caught in the middle in terms of their style of play, but they're in the semis.
They sure are, and Gerry, despite any of those concerns, there's a sense of optimism around this performance at Thomond Park, and the crowd were very into the game, and it was certainly talked about as a better brand of rugby in certain quarters. What was your read on the performance?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was a good way to win it with that try, and as a result of playing, I think it was about their third sustained multi-phase attack in the second half, and you felt it was coming. I thought there was a better shape to their attack than there had been through the phases. Even for Joey Carbery's try, I think there was 7 phases coming in off a line out. It wasn't just all pick and jams, one-off runners. And then when Peter O'Mahony had to step in at scrum half, he throws that old school left to right dive pass for Joey Carbery to pick his moment and score brilliant. And it was great to see Carbery back to his best, playing with that swagger that you just innately always used to associate with Joey Carbery. And as well as everything, I suppose, it was the goal kicking. Like, his goal kicking was world class. His goal kicking is now right up there almost with Johnny Sexton's, possibly the second best in Ireland. And to nail 6 out of 6, I don't know if you could possibly appreciate how difficult that would have been off a TV set, particularly the 3 first half ones into the wind. When he was asked to take on the first one for about 35 metres, he actually said, Peter, man, are you sure you want me to do this? Because they hadn't been going that well in the warm-up. So to get 6 out of 6, including one from the touchline in the second half, was essentially the difference. It's been a very interesting dynamic watching these two legs unfold. Don't know whether you agree with me, lads, but like, I'm not sure Exeter appreciated that it was cup rugby. I think I counted on at least 10 occasions where they turned down 3 shots at goal and went to the corner. Now that yielded a couple of tries for sure, 2 at least anyway. Whereas Munster took a 3 points in the first leg and took the 4 penalty goals at the post in the second leg and landed them all. And when you think that Exeter outscored Munster by 1 try, I think it was 4 tries, 3 over the 2 games, the policy of going for goal and the accuracy off the tee, I think Joe Simmons missed all 4 conversions as well as the penalty from the halfway line, was a hugely significant factor in Munster progressing to the quarterfinals. I think it was a little bit of, Munster have always understood the ethos of cup rugby going back, since God knows when. And I think that kind of shone through a little bit as well, that they understood the value of taking 3 regularly, keep the scoreboard ticking over. It helped no end that they kept the deficit in the first leg down to 5 points. That was much more of an option for them. You think back to Conor Murray's try-saving tackle and Joe Yandel and Keith Earls tracking across the pitch to tackle Ollie Woodburn. If either of those had been a score and a 2-score lead, I think it might have been a hugely different dynamic. They might have had to go for the corner more often. But overall, I thought on balance, it was a good performance, a lot of outstanding individual displays. Peter O'Mahony, most obviously, Jack O'Donoghue, John Hodnett, Joey Carbery as well. And the midfield was much improved, Ende, particularly in defence, because they were getting outflanked in first phase attack a lot against Leinster and in the first half and even the second half against Exeter. They largely resolved those issues, and their defence through phases was excellent, and they also won the breakdown, which probably was the difference.
Yeah, in many respects, Gerry, as you say, they probably won this fixture at Sandy Park. Ultimately, I was listening to Donal Lennon earlier on the RTE podcast, and he was saying that Exeter aren't what they used to be. If we're trying to find a context for this victory, the change to the latching law has undermined their real threat, their real modus operandi inside the 22, and they were missing 3 British and Irish lines in Luke Cowan-Dickey, Sam Simmons and Johnny Hill, and that's not to mention Jack Nowell supporting from the stands, which was
in full
hard to believe.
Full Munster garb.
Oh man,
was it a stag party or something like that?
Yeah. So I don't know, was he the stag or not, but he lost some bet somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gerry mentioned Peter O'Mahony, and he had an exceptional game. And at the breakdown, Munster really did a number on Exeter. And Sam Warburton made the point even during commentary on BT. He was saying there is much less of an emphasis on breakdown steals in the Premiership. There might be 3 or 4 steals on average across 80 minutes. I think Munster might have had double that by the half-time whistle. Very, very different attitudes to the breakdown amongst the provinces versus the Premiership, and Peter O'Mahony doesn't need a second invitation amongst others. Was that your experience when you played in the Premiership? Is this a traditional Premiership view on the breakdown?
My experience now is it's sepia toned. It's so long ago in the Premiership, and the game has evolved.
You were a groundhog type 10 from memory, weren't you?
Yeah. I don't believe I was in more than 5 rucks in a 10-year career, so I'm possibly not best served to comment. But I do think in the Premiership there at times there's a sense that they try and play. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do think there's a sense they try and play in a more progressive way, and maybe paying attention to or putting a greater focus on being destructive at the breakdown. They'll trade off, and they say, well, are we going to be a progressive team or a destructive team? I think the likes of Quins winning the Premiership, playing in such a kind of an expressive way and keeping the ball alive, people tend to look at success and try and emulate it, and Quins wouldn't have any attention to detail at the breakdown based on their last 2 seasons. They were a bit like, you score 35 and we'll score 36, and if that becomes successful, teams try and emulate it. So I think there's a lack of attention to detail to something as fundamental as being destructive or pilfering at the breakdown, and very hard to keep a focus on both sides of that when you're going from a different tournament from the Premiership into Europe. And I fully agree with Gerry. I think very strange choices in a knockout game to not, every single point counts. The aggregate idea is not it's not that difficult to understand. They're all intelligent people. I couldn't fathom why they turned down kickable penalties. So yeah, I mean, my experience at Premiership rugby probably was in some way similar to what we witnessed from Exeter is a lack of attention to that negative side and that destructive side of the game, and they seemed a little naive over the course of 2 legs. I think I would mention though, I think Munster's, the individual brilliance that we saw on a number of occasions is something that I would love to see harnessed in a more cohesive way across the team. I mean, Keith Earls, not having played in a number of months, making a 70-yard dash with 2 minutes to go in the away leg to save a certain try. Those type of moments are what ultimately wins you a 2-leg fixture. O'Mahony was outstanding. Carbery knocking over kicks in really difficult conditions again. They're all individual moments of brilliance that I'd like to see channeled into a more cohesive team approach at the moment. Not quite seeing that. There's a lot of unpredictability in terms of how they play, but a lot of excellence in individual performances.
Well, they have a couple of tricky URC fixtures, or in particular Ulster in Belfast, and they have Cardiff at home, which should be very winnable. And then it will be May the 7th at the Aviva Stadium, of course, Gerry. Munster, look, this is raised eyebrows, but I think very quickly people have understood the financial imperatives at play here. So I haven't seen, maybe I could be wrong here, but I haven't seen the Munster hierarchy being lashed out at here overly.
Well, I haven't gone into great depth analysing social media and the various message boards and so forth. I think there has been a fair bit of disquiet amongst Munster fans, Joe, that probably are a bit angry that this was a commercial decision rather than a rugby decision. As very often you get the chance to have a home quarter final. And the other thing as well is that the EPCR dates with the weekends allotted for quarter finals, semi-finals, and the rules about home quarter final and home semi-final advantage as well, don't forget, were all issued, I think, last June, and the Ed Sheeran dates were confirmed in September. So they knew in advance the chance they were taking, and I understand the marketing manager, Philip Nolan, said this was not a decision lightly taken. They did have to make redundancies last year within the Munster branch. They did have to let players go and trim their staff. It's been a very difficult time for all the provinces, but Munster particularly have their financial difficulties. We all know that. They've needed an outside benefactors in the 10-14 group to help fund the signings of Orji Snyman and Damien de Allende. And I suppose if they hadn't made the quarterfinals and they turned down the chance to host 2 Ed Sheeran concerts at Thomond Park, they would have got hit with another stick. So I was a bit angry because I came away from Saturday buzzing, because even before kickoff, Joe, although there was 6,000 or 7,000 empty seats or spaces behind the goals, though it was the best buzz I'd known at Thomond Park in quite some time, since pre-pandemic days for sure. And it was just great to see Munster play so well and the crowd stay fully engaged until the end. And it was just a bit like Munster of old, and here they were in the quarterfinals. And then, of course, Antoine Dupont's 75th minute try and Thomas Ramos' conversion earns them hundreds of thousands of lucre in terms of getting them a home quarterfinal. Now, in a sense, financially, it's win-win in that they've got the Ed Sheeran concert to take place at Thomond Park, and they hopefully will try and fill out now the Aviva for the quarterfinal against Toulouse. What grates slightly is that, it definitely might have diminished their chances of winning. You would have thought Toulouse would be happier taking on Munster in the Aviva Stadium than they would be in Thomond Park, where they've lost their 2 previous quarterfinals in Limerick in front of crowds. They won a last 16 tie there last season, but that was in an empty stadium, so there wasn't a Thomond Park factor per se. And then, of course, if it's Munster against Leinster in the semi-finals, they would have had home venue advantage again in the semis, Joe, which means they could conceivably have played Leinster in Thomond Park in semis as well. But that being said, it's going to hopefully generate some good income for them, as well as, of course, the multi-million pounds income boon for the Limerick and the Limerick County and all around Limerick City as well. So there's a bigger picture work here. I see what you're saying. And, my initial anger has gradually ebbed over the days since that, yeah, it's a decision you can understand why they had to make.
Well, Munster having to nominate the Aviva Stadium to play Leinster will stick in the craw for sure if that comes to fruition.
You don't see what choice they have. They're not going to get a Gaelic ground at 1 week's notice.
Yeah.
It was a unique unique set of circumstances last year, I think, when they were making that call. I know they were aware of the dates and they were aware they were taking that gamble, but the level of financial strife that a lot of rugby clubs have gotten into in the last couple of years, there's a guaranteed payday on the Ed Sheeran day. It's 9 months in advance. I think it's excusable I think it's understandable.
On the sporting front, I've heard it said, well, this won't be a huge disadvantage to Munster. I think this is a massive disadvantage. This is a several point swing. I was at the Munster Saracens game a couple of years ago, and it felt very much like a neutral venue. Big stadium, not nearly as hostile as Thomond. Players obviously not as comfortable as they would be in Thomond. I think whatever chance you might have given Munster against Toulouse at Thomond Park, I would put it to you, Toulouse now raging favourites to win at the Aviva. I
would agree. I think it's an unfortunate rebound of the choice they made, but they've ceded home advantage, and with that they've ceded the magic that is Thomond Park, a full and angry and crowd baying for blood Thomond Park, and I would imagine Toulouse are absolutely over the moon about going to the Aviva. It's an unfortunate reality of the situation. I think Thomond Park is worth at least 5 to 10 points. On that one, Gerry?
Yeah, it's hard to disagree. Like I pointed out earlier, the two previous occasions Toulouse came to Thomond Park for quarterfinals, which were in the modern redeveloped Thomond Park, and were 27,000 full stadia. They were well beaten on both occasions, and I think they might have been a little bit more spooked as they were in those 2 days. Granted, this is a much better Toulouse team, who are the reigning champions, are back at the summit of European and French rugby. But for those reasons as well, because they're I don't think Toulouse are quite right. You know what I mean? They're missing a few players. Julian Marchand's a huge loss for them. Even Dupont, Ntamak. They've had a huge season. All those French players, 8, 9, 10 of them involved in the Grand Slam, involved in the November Test when they beat the All Blacks. It's a big demand, and it's not it's not a well you can just keep going to every week on end and hope that you're going to find the magic. So I do think they are beatable, but I would agree with both of you that they would have been a little bit more beatable in Thomond Park.
Well, you brought us nicely to Belfast. So Ulster 23, Toulouse 30 points, a 1 point win on aggregate. And I think you're absolutely, Gerry, this is not vintage Toulouse. They are making mistakes. Dupont, I suspect, has played a lot of rugby. In the absence of their French stars, Toulouse wobbled very badly during the Six Nations, if you look at their results. And now the French players are back. But it's not quite flowing for them. They're working very hard, kicking hard under the water. What was so incredible about the game at Belfast is that regardless of the fact that passes are not sticking and this is not as joined up as they would like, man, do they not for a moment not adhere to their principles and just keep throwing the thing around like with abandon. You're watching them on Saturday night. This game is in the melting pot, and I don't know, maybe it's the Irish DNA. You're thinking bit more pragmatism here and you'll be okay, but geez, they just keep going for it, and it's why they're box office. It's why you have to watch them, and ultimately it did pay dividend in the end against Ulster, who, Gerry, will feel they have left this behind them.
Oh, will they what? It's going to be devastating for them. As bad as that quarter-final home defeat to Saracens was when Jared Payne got sent off early on, and they nearly even won that day with 14 men. I think this is going to hurt even more. The great thing about the two-legged format is you can't have an awful lot of excuses. You've got 80 minutes at home, you've got 80 minutes away. It's the same for all participating teams. But I was at the first match in Toulouse, and it was a belter of an occasion, Joe. Like, we think we've got great atmospheres at rugby matches in Ireland, but that was 28,000 capacity.
Well, we don't actually. There was an Irish Times piece, Andy. I don't know if you read it about the Aviva Stadium. I'd say your Twitter timeline was interesting for a few days.
But anyway, it was even then, coming away from that match, you felt the fact that Toulouse came back from 13 points down to get a late try again through Ntamak, got them to within a score. There's such a difference, we talked about it with the Munster extra game, between taking a 2-score lead into the second leg and a 1-score lead. As Dan McFarlane said after the first leg, that can go in the blink of an eye against a team like Toulouse, particularly, even off colour. And then I think they led by 10 points on aggregate in the second leg, and they had so many chances and so many things went wrong for Ulster in that last quarter. I'd say it was a very difficult review for them. There was obviously the Tom O'Toole red card, which is a huge turning point. I think Matthew Carley's refereeing, the penalty against James Hugh was critical when he briefly went off his feet and bounced back up to his feet because a Toulouse player pulled out of the way at the last second. It was a ridiculously harsh penalty, and it gave Toulouse access into the Ulster 22, which led to Antoine Dupont's winning try against 14 men. And then, to compound it all, Marty Moore does a 62-minute shift, which is a pretty decent shift for a tight head, and he's replaced. 3 minutes later, Tom O'Toole gets red carded. 5 minutes later is a scrum, so Marty has to trudge back on again for the last 10 minutes. And then 5 minutes from time, he's out in the middle of the pitch, and who's moved to out half from scrum half but the World Player of the Year to skin him on the outside. I mean, when your luck's out, your luck's out. And Yeah, there'll be so many moments. I'm even thinking back to one little moment in the first leg when James Hume combined with Stuart McCluskey, he made his clean break, and he had John Cooney on his outside and Robert Balakoon on his outside, Cooney on his inside. And not unreasonably, he chose Robert Balakoon on his outside, as I think 99 players out of 100 would probably do in those circumstances. But if he had given it inside to John Cooney, Cooney scores much nearer the post, and he missed the conversion from wide out, whereas he would have got the one from beside the post. Like, the margins are so tiny when you lose by 1 point, 50-49 over 160 minutes. But yeah, that's going to be such a difficult. I'd say it's the crudest defeat they've had in a long time, right up there when they threw the kitchen sink at Leinster 3 seasons ago at the Aviva. But given this was at home and they had the winning of the game, even more so.
Yes.
I heard Henderson interviewed this visceral, gut-wrenching disappointment from a player of considerable experience now, just in terms of how close and yet again so far. It was an interesting interview to hear from a captain kind of spill his guts out. He was so upset, and I mean this in a refreshing way. There was no we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll regather. There was no cliches about it. He wore his heart in his sleeve. He was absolutely distraught, and I can understand.
Big chance. Time is ticking for Henderson, you must realise, and they wasted a couple of years at Ulster. Now they're back in a good place. If they had won this game, which they should have on balance over the two, they've got a home quarter final against Munster, which they would have fancied. Suddenly they're in a semi-final. And then things get very interesting for them. I'm going to come to you on this because I've spoken to Gerry about this, I would say, about 1,000 times over the last couple of years. We had a red card in this game, high hit. We've seen this movie before several times. Could have been other cards, by the way. That Lowry was very lucky for tackle in the air, I think, not to get a card of some sort. But that's not so much what we're talking about here. But a high hit, red card, could have been another. Like Steve Thompson's autobiography serialised at the weekend, and again it's absolutely harrowing reading, where it brings home what we're talking about here in this sport and the damage that can be done. And he's recounting screaming at the dog, and the dog not responding and continuing to scream at the dog, and looks down to see his confused 3-year-old son, and then he realises, I've been calling the dog by my son's name. Or being in the kitchen with his wife and they're talking as couples talk in the kitchen, and he knows that she's his wife and he just can't remember her name. And it's utterly horrific, and he's having very dark thoughts about the request, I suppose, he's making of his wife and family over the decades to come. So it's utterly horrific, and the game is trying to change, and I think it should be applauded for the way it's trying to change after red card after red card. I can't in any sport, Andy, think of such a lag in behavioural change. Like if we have a new Premier League rule, handball is being penalised, within 2 or 3 weeks players have adapted. Gaelic games, every league campaign, they're now big on the hand pass. Players start adapting. We're now several years into sendings off, and we're still seeing players tackle upright, shoulders into heads, red cards, shoulders into heads, red cards. It leads me to believe that defensive coaches are not coaching correct tackle technique.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation about the lag. Then again, some changes easier than others in terms of, I work in healthcare. There's been a public health campaign to stop smoking for 60 years and it's still widespread. Some messages are harder to get across than others. I always remember the 2011 World Cup when Alan Rowland red carded, well, I think it was a Warburton. Yeah. There was an overnight reaction to that. There was no lag time or adjustment, because there's a conscious decision to, well, you've made the hit, you lift and you tip. There's a very conscious decision to that. There's some of these contacts head to head are about body position, or about, sometimes you see someone slightly trip or hit contact off some other player and fall into contact, and there's an accidental element at times to it. There's a it's not obvious or not conscious that players are going in to shoulder to the face. It's a very conscious decision to tip tackle and tip the head and go beyond the horizontal, and we all became very familiar with that phrase. I think from a behavioural point of view, it was easier to implement that straight away. I just think it's a very, very difficult thing to change based on the collision nature of the sport. But I think for what it's worth sticking with it. It's worth sticking with controversy. But I also think it's worth sticking on the conservative side and making the red cards continue in order to avoid what you started out your question with, is players who have to deal with the darkness 10 years later. And I know many, some are on record. I played with Michael Lipman in Bath, who's been diagnosed with early dementia. I played against Steve Thompson, and there are a number of Irish players who aren't out on record who have grave concerns around their mental health and their cognition, and it's as a result of consistent head collisions in rugby, and they don't look back on that favourably. So I think for all the controversy and barroom conversation and radio and TV and media conversation, I think it's worth sticking with. If you've come this far, and yes, there's a lag time, but there are complexities to changing collisions.
Yes.
And I think it will come over time with consistency, and the message eventually will get across. I actually don't think... I think a lot of defensive coaches are really trying their best to get people lower in the tackle, to get you using your footwork to adapt. But ultimately it is, when you carry the ball, you want to win collisions, and sometimes in a split second there's a collision that happens that is a couple of inches off where it should have been, and yes, you got to just hit it with a red card then, I think, more often than not.
Okay, well, that's a very nuanced way of addressing it. Gerry, we've talked about it a lot, so for the purposes of time, if you don't mind, I'll press on. Leinster double scores on Connacht on aggregate, 82 points to 41, 56-20 on the Friday night. It was interesting. Andy Friend felt, certainly from a physicality point of view, Connacht didn't match Leinster, and that was, one of their primary undoings. For the Gibson Park try, where I think is it Baird out in the wing and Lowe sets Park away. I suspect you might have been at the stadium, but on the TV coverage, Sam Warburton just said, "Oh my God, this is the All Blacks. This is All Blacks kind of strike," and they're just too good. They're too good for 90% of teams, 99% of teams they come up against.
Yeah, it's not the first time that Leinster or indeed Ireland have even been compared to the All Blacks this season. I think, did Nicky Evans say to Jerry Flannery that that Ireland will remind him a little bit of the All Blacks during the Six Nations as well, and last November. They're just too good for a team like Connacht, right? They're too good for a lot of sides. There is a deficiency in the ball carrying department. I think in that Connacht team, you see the difference even when Abram Papali'i comes on. I think it makes quite a difference. They're a little bit short of ball carrying, whereas Leinster's ball carrying strengths have improved considerably this season with the emergence of Dan Sheehan and Ronan Keller coming on another notch. I think even with Caelan Doris and Jack Conan coming on another notch, they're just they've got a raft of ball carries. And then you look at Robbie Henshaw, how fresh he is now in the midfield as well. And then the way they use James Lowe, who's an enormous ball carrier as well. Connacht just don't have those kind of weapons, and it's very interesting the way that Leinster are using James Lowe so much in their starter plays. He's so heavily involved in not just the 4 tries he scored, the other tries. And, if all else fails, they get inside your 22, they can just pick and jam or one-off runners and get over their line that way. They've got such a variety and such a different way of scoring tries that, the only thing is that, they come through Connacht and they're looking very sharp and very fresh, and they've got a lot of strings to their bow. Hopefully James Ryan comes back now as well, and of course they've got Andrew Porter and Kelleher back, so they're not far off full strength and all these talents they've got. That the only thing is that their draw is probably as tough as they could have imagined Leicester at Welford Road in the quarter-final. Put it this way, if it was over 2 legs, you've been making Leinster firm favourites. The fact that it's now a one-off knockout tie in Leicester with a baying Welford Road crowd just makes it, and what seems like a narrow pitch in the Aviva, you just think that there will be tougher tests ahead, and you think of Saracens and La Rochelle. It's coming up against the big packs like Leicester that, will be the ultimate test for Leinster if they're going to get over the line and get that 5th star in their chest. Yes.
And should Toulouse beat Munster, for instance, so if Munster win, it's at the Aviva, presumably, would it be in Toulouse?
No, if Leinster and Toulouse both won, Leinster would be at home the semis. So either way, it looks like Leinster are going to be playing a semi-final in the Aviva.
Okay. Andy, that's if
they get through.
Yes, well, listen, that's a big assumption. Jerry mentioned, Welford Road, Leicester Pack. I'm not as au fait with the Leicester Pack, I should say, as, La Rochelle last year and Saracens previously, and Will Skelton, I'm sure, is on several minds. There is a reason Leinster are bringing in a Jason Jenkins, for instance, next season, and so James Ryan is back and fit again. Second row, So that, they effectively have the Irish front row, and the back row has got a lot going on. How worried should Leinster be, for instance, over deficiencies in power in the second row? Why is that so pivotal? Or is it?
I know. I think they've a way to circumnavigate that currently the way they're playing,
as opposed to previous years.
Yes, I just think their execution is a little better in terms of phase play. I think they've identified a number of other ball carriers. Gerry mentioned Doris. Gerry mentioned Jack Conan. 3 seasons ago, Josh van der Fleur was not considered a ball carrier. He's become unbelievably dynamic and effective as a ball carrier. He's almost an unsung hero of a ball carrier. Every time he carries, he's doing damage, and he's accelerating into contact, and he's being explosive. I think what they identified as a coaching team is if we can't, airdrop the perfect solution into the second row, some others are going to have to step up to the plate and develop their ability to carry the ball. And you wouldn't look at Van der Fleer and say he's a Will Skelton by any shadow, nor will he be destructive against a Will Skelton. But he's an additional ball carrier who can accelerate into space, who can attract 2 defenders by doing that, and can free up space elsewhere. And what they do really well now is that once they get any sense of a chink in the defensive armour, the resultant execution of phase play is of such a high standard. Warburton alluded to the All Blacks. It always reminds me of a Wayne Smith quote, who's considered central to their 2 World Cups in 11 and 15, is you never get tired of doing the simple things well. And I just think they've dialed that up again. Okay. And I think Lancaster is very, very hot on that in terms of high level intensity training sessions, execution of skills under pressure, and I think they're trying to circumnavigate their way around the lack of timber that they have in the second row right now as a solution. So I think they're doing a really good job at it, actually.
They are in South Africa. They have the Sharks in Durban, and then they have the Stormers, and there are the Welford Road Soldiers, I think, preparing in Dublin. That's where Leinster are. They're first in the URC. They have a home quarter and home semi-final. As for Connacht, Gerry, just a word on how their season plays out now. They've the Lions in Johannesburg, and then they have the Sharks. Andy Friend said an interesting thing. I was reading the quote in your paper. He said, there are players that we know are moving on, and we haven't brought them to South Africa. We're still very much in the season, but we want to invest in the people who are going to be here next year, which was kind of an interesting approach. They're 10th in the URC. So I was reading, really, they need the guts of 3 bonus point wins if they want to have any real hope of making the playoffs and having Champions Cup rugby next season. That seems like a tall order in the extreme here for Connacht.
I think you're absolutely right, Joe. Not only are they 10th in the URC, aren't they about 10 points behind the top 8 as well, I think? Yeah. They're a good gap behind. I think that ship has sailed as well for them. I think that's possibly why Andy Friend can take this attitude not to bring the Breve Brown duo of Abraham Papali and Sammy Arnold, because if they were just 2 or 3 points off the top 8, I'd venture they both might be there, because then you might as well throw everything at it. But in a sense, he knows that ship has probably sailed. And also the South African side, they're just on a roll, aren't they, now at home? They're back more to near full strength, and they were all written off a little bit too prematurely early on in the season, when they didn't adapt the away games. They were missing their Springboks frontliners. Home conditions with the Springbok frontliners back in. They're on a long sequence of winning runs now, a lot of them at home. They could well have 3, if not 4, in the playoffs, possibly even a home quarter finalist in the playoffs. So it would actually, whatever Connacht get, I think, is a building block towards next season for sure. And it would be actually nice to see Leinster win a game or 2 over there, just to, to stop the South African momentum, because suddenly they look a little bit ominous.
Well, Gerry, did I see headlines play the final in South Africa this week?
Yes. This has been mooted. Yes. Which would seem, I would have hoped and thought that whoever was top seed, which is obviously good chances are going to be Leinster, they wouldn't be rewarded by having to be sent down to South Africa for a final.
And the logic being to further ingratiate the tournament with the South African public.
Yeah.
Okay.
But either way, Joe, it's absolutely abundantly clear, if this is how well they've done in their first season, the likelihood is the South African sides are only going to get stronger, which is going to make it more and more difficult for the Irish sides to A, win the URC, and B, qualify to the playoffs, and C, qualify for the Heineken Champions Cup.
I think it's a good thing that the URC is becoming more competitive. That's probably one of the biggest issues about it as a draw for the viewer in the last couple of seasons. So many dud fixtures. I mean, it's a positive.
Just before we go, England-Ireland, 12 o'clock Sunday in the TikTok Women's Six Nations. The Irish Sevens players are gone. They have a World Seven Series event at the end of the month in Canada. So from the Italian win, numbers 11 to 15 included, all of those players gone overnight, plus Brittany Hogan and Anna McGann. They've also gone the way of sevens. And just to compound matters, Sam Monaghan in the second row, who had been one of Ireland's best players, is out injured. So England in their last three games, 31 tries, 189 points. In effect, since England handed out 28 full-time professional contracts in 2019, they have not lost a game. They are the best team in this competition. They are the best team quite probably in the world, odds on to win the World Cup. It's at Welford Road. So Andy, what do you do? I mean, give us an insight into, you're in a team, this team, Irish team, will have never played together before, given the sevens turnover. It's a difficult thing where losing by 40, maybe even 50 or less is a good day at the office. This is, it's a strange mindset to get yourself into.
Yeah, it's a real difficulty for Greg McWilliams and the coaching team to lose that many key players to the sevens. It's I think the big challenge is that they haven't yet identified backup that's strong enough. I think one of Greg's biggest ideologies coming into the job was that he needed to develop strength and depth, and he sent out an email to all Ireland League players in December with the requirements that he needed for them to be in the squad, and one of his biggest ones was fitness levels and the ability to play with the ball, keep the ball in play for longer periods, multiple phases. And I think he'd identified it down to the minute. Now, the average women's international game was keeping the ball in play for 36 minutes, and they wanted to train to build it up to 37, 38 minutes in training. And he's trying to find people that fit that first.
By the way, they've managed. It hasn't really made any great impact on results.
It hasn't yet. It hasn't, and it's been pretty tricky for them. I think the second or third choices probably aren't quite up to the strength and depth that the English have as a result of 28 professional contracts and further back up there, and a greater amount of numbers across the UK. So it's going to be a really, really difficult day for them, I'd imagine, based on the loss of key players to the sevens and the injury.
Yeah. Not sure how you frame it. Gerry, final word to you on it.
Well, it was an uneven playing field to begin with, and now it's just got even more uneven. Like, England have been professional for 2 years. They are the best team in the world. It's all part of a master plan to win the World Cup, and there's every chance they will do that. And they can. It's not really the IRFU's fault, or it's certainly not Greg McWilliams' fault, that the sevens first leg is clashing with the last round of Six Nations. So the sevens players are now away preparing for that. I can understand the RFU's thinking in those players being made available for that competition, totally. But Ireland can't take that kind of drain the way England and France can. So this clash suits the stronger squad. It suits England and France.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens Sunday afternoon, Sunday lunchtime. Our rugby coverage and off the ball with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. Andy Dunne, thank you for coming into the studio.
No problem, Joe.
And Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times. Cheers, Gerry.
Cheers, Joe. Thank you. Cheers, Andy.
Cheers, Gerry.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.